Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm actually very excited to show you this piece and the process because it's gonna bring a lot of new life to my pieces and to my approach. So for me, this is like a whole new lease on art and watercolors. So I can't wait to get into figuring this out and making sure that I know where I want to push myself. But without further ado, what I'm going to be talking about today I'm working on a lineless watercolor piece, which is not some brand new thing. Most watercolorists work without lines, and if you watch much of my videos, you know that I like to start off with micron pens and have a solid line work before I get into watercoloring it. And that's because I love the look of line art. It's one thing that's consistent in all of the other artwork that I like. When I'm looking at other artists and trying to find inspiration, line work is pretty much always there, and it is something that I've always felt very strongly about including in my pieces. But I've been realizing lately that I've been feeling very stagnant with my approach and with my pieces, and I wasn't really sure what it was. And of course, there's a lot of different things to it, and I talk a lot about those, but I think a big thing is that the line work that I do use, it's just not adaptive to the pieces that I'm working on and to growth. It's really kind of stuck in its place. It's not allowing me to really innovate it. So that's what I'm most excited about moving into a quote unquote lineless watercolor technique, is that line work is still going to be there, but it's going to free me up to be much more selective about where I'm putting it, because it's not something that has to be over the entire piece. It also allows me to be a little bit more careful about the color choices and what I'm using to make them what they are, because when it comes to microns, I have a set limited color palette. Of course, there are a lot of other ways that you can do line work before you're doing your watercolors, and I've tried a lot of them, but ultimately microns were the choice for me. It came down to that, but it was still so limiting, and they're so fine that it takes a lot of work to get more variation in the line weight. So there's a lot of cons about it, and they had their pros too, but I am really excited about being able to utilize the watercolors to create line work, or to move into potentially using ink. Because I'm not requiring myself to have waterproof line work, I can use some inks that I had to pass up before, but it will allow me to be able to go into places where it needs more definition. I can add it. Where others, maybe I want it to be less defined, so I don't have to be required to put it there. And I've also found, just working in this piece, that, and I didn't really even realize I was doing it, but I was letting the value and the color of the microns, the line work that I originally started with, really rein me in on the watercolors that I was using. So because I no longer use black line work, it requires me that if I still want the line work to show, I have to be a lot more light with the shadows and with the colors themselves. So I have to hold off to a certain degree to make sure that the values have the hierarchy that they need to have so that it's readable. But since I've tried, at least in this piece, where I flip that around, where I let the colors come first and then I would tailor the line work to exactly what it needs to be, if it needs to be there, I found that I'm getting way more dimensional shadows. I'm pushing them so that they're a lot darker, and I'm thinking a lot more in shapes rather than lines. So the shadow shapes that I'm able to create, or I have been trying to create, are a little bit more broken out of the mold of what I have been doing, especially in the hair. That's where I'm really noticing this change, is that in a lot of the ways that I would have approached hair, I'm being a lot more freed up on being able to block things together and be more adaptive with the way that I'm portraying it in this piece. But there was one area that I did wish that I had a little bit more of a precise structure to be able to work off of, because just a little background info, when I transferred the sketch onto the paper, I used a non-photo blue coal erase pencil, which was sent to me. So thank you, Basement, for sending that to me. I was really excited to use that. But it's very, very light, which is perfect for this because it gets completely covered up. But when it came to the facial features, where I wanted it to be pretty much exactly what I had in the sketch, I loved the look of it and the certain expression that she had, and a little bit of the more nuanced line work that it had. And that kind of got eroded as I was working on this. So the shape of the eyes got a little bit out of hand, and the mouth also, I didn't quite get the same shape that I wanted. And that's something that moving forward I can be a little bit more aggressive with, making sure that the shape of the eyes is there so I can see what I wanted it to be, and then I can build up on it. Not necessarily in ink or anything as permanent as that, but something that I could see clearer, more clear. And that way I could make sure that it was a little bit more true to what I wanted it to be, rather than trying to slowly reel it back into what it is. So in the end, her facial expression is a little bit more neutral and blank than I would have liked, but that is something that I pretty much always struggle with, is getting the facial expressions just the way I want them to be. And when I finally got to the leaves, I was actually a little bit unsure as to where I wanted to go with them. I actually really liked the negative space of just having them white like the paper. It was really graphic and interesting, but ultimately I decided to end up actually rendering them out and making them actual leaves. But that's also one of the fun things about the fact that it wasn't line worked, is that I could be more adaptive with the way that I handled it. Once I got to that point, it was something that I could look at it and see, okay, where does this piece need to go now? What can I do with it with the current place that it's at? And that's just one of the things that I really noticed with this piece, is that I push things a lot more than I normally would have. The colors are a lot more saturated because I wasn't afraid to add more layers to get that. And I felt way more engaged with this one. It felt like a process of where I was discovering the piece rather than checking off boxes of, okay, I've painted this area and I painted this area and this area. Now I just have this much left to do. This felt like I was watching a piece evolve in front of my eyes and become something. And that was a really good feeling. It was something that I've been missing for a long time. And I don't think that the culprit is simply that it was line worked and now that I'm not using lines, I'm suddenly freed up. I think it's a lot more to do with the fact that I've been working in the same technique for a long time now, and I haven't really been pushing myself outside of those bounds. And now that I've broken those and I'm working outside of that box, I'm feeling all of these great new emotions that I felt before when I was finding new ways to approach art and finding new techniques. So I think that this is definitely the right path for me to explore and figure out, because it does open so many new doors that I had already shut on myself. And I think one thing, looking back at it, something that could have improved this piece is I used reference photos for the shadows on her face, but I used one where it was pretty one note. The light was shining pretty close to straight on her face, so there wasn't a lot of very dramatic shadow shapes, and that's something that could have really improved this piece, I think. I would really like to be a little bit more aggressive with the way that I do shadows. I think they add a lot of interest to them and depth to the pieces, and I love cast shadows and the way that they affect the forms that they're landing on. So I would really like to be more thoughtful about the way that I'm designing the shadows as well. That is actually something that tends to come after the fact. That's like the last thing I think about, because it's just a glaze on top of everything else. But it is something that I really need to be designing right from the beginning, from the sketch, because it does really change the look of a piece. So if I'm thinking about that from the very beginning, and I do always make sure that I put the shadows in my color comps, or at least I try to, but if I am more thoughtful about exactly the shape and how they're going to influence the pieces, I think I can get much more interesting shadow shapes, because that's all being done in the design phase. But this one, yes, I think I could have done and pushed the shadows a little bit more so her face wasn't quite as flat, but I think that just comes down to choosing a little bit better of a reference to work off of. And a little hint, if you're working with reference photos for getting the values correct, which is a really good idea, I highly recommend it. A great way to make sure that you're getting the correct values is that to actually turn the photo into black and white, whether you just have it on your computer or you print it out. Being able to work from just a black and white photo helps take away the info that can be more distracting, because it's actually interesting, but the brain perceives different colors as different values. We naturally see yellow as being light and naturally see purple as being darker, but they're not necessarily always darker or lighter than what we're thinking. When we're looking at colors, it can confuse the values that we're actually perceiving. So this is a great way to be able to just get the values down, especially when you're branching out of the colors that are happening in your reference photo, which I pretty much always like to do. I don't like to stick with what's happening in the work that I'm already looking at to be able to make it happen. So I much prefer to be able to work that way. That way I can get the accurate info that I need, and then I can just completely brush off all the other stuff that I don't want. And that is it for today. I do have the original painting available at my shop. Again, there's a link in the description. There's also a link to my Patreon where you can help support this channel and get some exclusive goodies. And I also have a link to all the tools that I used to create this painting down below. So if you'd like to check that out, that's all there. But I will be back next Wednesday with another video. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you then.